I want to walk you through a hypothetical. Can I walk you through a hypothetical? Actually, no. I want to walk you through a whole series of hypotheticals, an entire day's worth of them, in fact, just to emphasize the point. Let's imagine you wake up in the morning, you take a shower, you fix your breakfast, you get dressed, you watch the Captain Curmudgeon program, then you head out the door to leave for work. But you step outside and you notice something strange. The ground appears to be wet, and it's not just wet in one spot either. It's freaking everywhere, as far as the eye can see. But where did the water come from that made the ground wet? It can't have come from the sky because it's not raining, and you don't see any clouds. You do remember hearing a weather report that said there was the possibility of overnight rain showers giving way to AM sunshine, but since you didn't personally see it happen, well, it would be highly responsible if you started jumping to conclusions about how the ground got wet. Now, trying your best to put this confusing experience out of your mind, you hop into the car and drive to the office. Except you don't quite make it to the office. Your car breaks down on the way there. Damnedest thing you ever saw. You're just driving along, minding your own business, and the engine just up and dies. No idea what caused it. But there was this little gas pump-shaped light on the dashboard that kept flashing right before it happened. And the lady robot voice kept saying, "You have 0 miles remaining. Please refuel immediately." It's hard to say if the two things are related, though. Might as well tell the mechanic about it, I guess. It might help him to diagnose the problem. So you hitchhike the rest of the way to the office. You finally get yourself in the door, you punch the time clock, and you head for the kitchen to grab a much-deserved cup of joe. You just wish you could find that rat bastard who's been using your coffee creamer without asking. You arrive in the office kitchen. You see your asshole coworker scrambling to close the refrigerator before you get into the room. You see him stirring a cup of coffee to which creamer has quite obviously just been added. You open the fridge, finding no creamer except your own personal supply, and you notice there is less creamer in the container than there was when you left it yesterday. And the asshole coworker keeps glancing over at you with a rather guilty expression on his face. So you say to him, "Bob," you say, "do you happen to know anything about where my coffee creamer has been disappearing to?" And Bob says, "I bet you wouldn't ask me that question if I was white." Then you profusely apologize and promise to do better. You finish out your workday. You call up an Uber to take you home since your car's in the shop. And when you walk in the door, you see a dead mouse on the floor. At the same time, over in the corner of the room, you see your trusty pet cat. He's sitting there with a look of smug self-satisfaction on his face while cleaning some unknown red substance off of his paws. Then you stride confidently out to the front yard and explain to the assembled press corps that you have no leads regarding the cause of the mouse's death. Could have been anything, really. We'll probably never know. I think it's best if we all just move on and put this regrettable incident behind us, don't you? Now, if this all sounds to you like a normal day, everyday pattern of investigative behavior, join the U.S. Secret Service today. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where Hunter Biden's cocaine blues continues to dominate the summer pop chart thanks to you crazy kids. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I'm your eponymous host and humble servant. And if there is any four-word phrase in the English language that really gets this reporter's blood pumping, it's big, round, heaving breasts. Wait, that's not right. What I meant to say is user-submitted historical topics. And since we have a lot of new subscribers at the moment, I'm just going to throw it out there. If you have a historical topic you would like to see covered, or a movie you would like me to review, or any damn thing like that, drop me an email. Write a comment. I don't care. Either way, I'll make it happen. And we've got a good one today. I actually received this request a couple weeks ago, and I've been saving it up for the right day. And though it is one of the most exciting and impressive stories to come out of the Second World War, it's astounding to consider that 80 years later, nobody has ever made a dedicated movie about it. And I have some thoughts about why that might be, but we'll get into that later on. But without further ado, tonight's topic is Operation Vengeance, which was the code name given to the operation wherein American pilots ambushed and shot down the airplane carrying Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy and architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, on Sunday, 18 April 1943. When you set aside the decision to drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the decision to carry out Operation Vengeance was possibly the most morally complex choice the United States had to make in the entire Pacific War. A lot of people were squeamish about it at the time, and some people, they're still squeamish about it today. It created a lot of controversy, which still hasn't really been fully settled, about where the gray area is between military tactics and political assassination. Traditionally, according to the unwritten rules of war, an enemy commander who's actively leading his troops on the battlefield is fair game for being targeted and killed. But what if he's not leading his troops on the battlefield? What if he's just in transit from one place to another? Is it still morally justifiable to kill him? Now, the decision to personally target Yamamoto was probably the first decision of its kind in the history of armed conflict. But it wasn't a decision that American war planners ever consciously set out to make. It was a decision they only ever had to wrestle with because a fortuitous bit of intelligence happened to fall right into their laps. You see, what happened was, in early 1943, the U.S. cryptographers succeeded in fully cracking the Japanese naval cipher code. And so from that point on, we could read pretty much every single word they were saying. But the last thing we want is for the enemy to know that. It's the same conundrum the British had a couple years earlier when the cryptographers at Bletchley Park succeeded in cracking the German Enigma code. This is fantastic. We can read all the enemy's radio traffic now. We know what all their plans are. But we have to let on like we don't really know that. So anything we decide to do because we had advanced knowledge of it, we sort of need to maintain some kind of plausible deniability. We need to have a cover story that provides a credible explanation for how we could have known this thing without having cracked the code. In other words, we have to be able to make it look like we just caught a lucky break. Because if they figure out that we've cracked their cipher and are reading all of their traffic, then they will just switch to a new code and then we will all be screwed. And it was no different with Operation Vengeance. We know that Yamamoto is flying from this island to this island on this day at this time. We know exactly when he is scheduled to take off and arrive. We know exactly what aircraft he's going to be in, and we are going to kill that dude. But we need to kill him in such a way that the enemy doesn't know we gained the ability to kill him by cracking their naval code, which is a pretty interesting logistical problem when you get right down to it. Because they have to plan the bullshit cover story before they plan the actual operation. They have to invent a whole narrative for how a flight of American P-38s just happened to intercept Yamamoto's plane at the exact right moment when he was in transit from one Japanese-held island to another Japanese-held island. And so, they decided to blame it on the Australians. Now, ever since the start of the war, the Australian coast has been under constant surveillance, and for obvious reasons, because at various times an invasion of Australia was very much a part of Japanese strategic doctrine. And there were a number of bombing raids against coastal Australian towns early in the war, most famously the bombing of Darwin on 19 February 1942. The Australians didn't much like getting bombed, as most people don't. So they decided, crikey, mate, we'd better improve our ability to monitor the coast here, so we don't get bombed again. Because getting bombed kind of sucks, mate. And all they give us is these stinking binoculars. I think the Brits have got to give us something better than stinking binoculars, so we don't get bombed again, because getting bombed sucks. So by the spring of 1943, these complaints have made their way to London and been duly registered with the proper authorities, so there's been a significant upgrade by now in the quality of equipment for the Aussie coastal monitors. Instead of shitty binoculars, they have got really, really good binoculars now. And more importantly, they've also got themselves some radar towers and some top-of-the-line analog rangefinders. So by the time of Operation Vengeance, it's within the realm of plausibility that if some Australian coast watchers were in just the right spot, looking just in the right direction, with just the right equipment, they might have been able to see a Japanese plane and alert the Americans to its presence in time for it to go and be shot down. And now that we have settled on our cover story, Well, let's plan the actual operation, shall we? Now, it was known by the U.S. Navy cryptographers that on 18 April, Yamamoto was scheduled to begin an inspection tour of Japanese bases in the Solomon Islands, the first leg of which he'd be flying from Rabaul to Bougainville. He and his staff would be flying in two Mitsubishi GM4 Bettys escorted by six Mitsubishi A6M Zeros. Departure from Rabaul was scheduled for 0600 with arrival in Bougainville at 0800. And there is still some uncertainty about which American official gave the final go-ahead for the operation to proceed. It's known with a fair degree of certainty that President Roosevelt gave verbal authorization, and only verbal authorization, to Navy Secretary Frank Knox, but no written record of the order was ever created. So it seems Secretary Knox also wasn't very keen on being the man to give the final sign-off, so he kicked the decision down to Admiral Nimitz, who in turn kicks it down to Admiral Halsey, who says, look, I know this decision should be made way the hell above my pay grade, but if you're telling me to make it, I say let's stop sitting around here with our thumbs up our asses and go kill the son of a bitch. At least, that's what I like to imagine, Halsey said. I suspect it's probably not that far from the truth. So you can tell throughout this story that everybody is wrestling with the moral dilemma of whether it's permissible to target an enemy commander for assassination and kill him in an ambush. On the one hand, there seems to have been top-to-bottom agreement that, hey, if a piece of intelligence falls into our lap like this one did, we would be negligent in our duty to the young men we command if we don't take a shot at killing this guy. But from where we sit right now today, the best tool we have for shortening this war and saving the maximum number of American lives, from where I'm sitting, is to take this opportunity to liquidate the enemy's top naval tactician and thus take him off the board permanently. But is that really what we're doing here? Is our goal in mounting this operation a military one or a political one? And doesn't our answer to that question determine whether or not this undertaking on which we are about to embark is a political assassination as opposed to a tactical military expedient? Because yes, of course, obviously, the death of Yamamoto will rob the Imperial Japanese Navy of its best tactician. But it will also simultaneously eliminate Japan's most popular and widely beloved political figure. It will demoralize the nation in such a way that no other event could do. There are a lot of people, even right now, here in the spring of 1943, who think Yamamoto should be not just the commander-in-chief of the Navy, but the commander-in-chief of all the armed forces. Some even think he should be the prime minister. There's a feeling in some quarters that if the war should start going badly for Japan, as it looks like it might, Yamamoto might be the only leader who could effectively unite the nation and instill its people with the resolve to continue the struggle. Meanwhile, over on the American side, they were just about all finished with the ethical hand-wringing. So let's plan this operation and go kill this bastard. The P-38 Lightning is the only fighter we have with the range to carry out an operation like this, and even still, it's going to be a fairly closely run thing. Each airplane is going to need 2,000-pound drop tanks, and there won't be any time to loiter over the target waiting for the other guys to arrive either. They need to plot this thing so they arrive over Bougainville exactly when Yamamoto does. The plan is to arrive and begin the ambush right when the Japanese planes have begun their final approach. So they'll be flying nice and slow with their flaps down. Our guys should be able to get in their shots before there is the chance for the Japanese pilots to make any sort of evasive maneuvers. Major John W. Mitchell is commander of the 339th Fighter Squadron, 347th Fighter Group. He is already an ace. He is the finest P-38 pilot in the South Pacific Theater, and he is the only man to lead a mission like this one. But he's also an Army pilot, which means he doesn't have an abundance of experience navigating over huge stretches of featureless open ocean, so the first thing he does upon finding out he's been chosen to lead this mission is to ask that the Army compass be removed from his airplane and replaced with a Navy compass, which I kind of tells you how seriously this mission was being taken, because the absolute last thing an Army guy ever wants to do is to admit, even tacitly, that the Navy has better equipment. But then, I guess the desire not to get lost and run out of gas and drown in the middle of the South Pacific is a pretty powerful motivator. So Mitchell is duly provided with his brand new Navy compass, and he decides that he is good to go now. There are a total of 18 P-38s assigned to fly the mission. 4 of these would be designated as the killer flight, for reasons that should be fairly obvious and self-explanatory. These 4 would have the job of engaging and shooting down the plane containing Yamamoto, while the other 14 would remain at a higher altitude and be ready to engage any Japanese fighters that were scrambled in response to the attack. The 4 guys in the killer flight were Captain Thomas G. Lanphier Jr. commanding, and Lieutenants Rex T. Barber, James McClanahan, and Joseph Moore. And have you ever in your life heard a more fighter pilot sounding name than Rex T. Barber? Because I myself have not. But in the event, only 2 guys out of the 4 in the killer flight ever made it to the target. McClanahan and Moore both had engine trouble and had to return to base, so then it was all down to Lanphier and Barber. And it is still, right up to the present day, a matter of fairly heated controversy which guy actually shot down Yamamoto's plane. For Major Mitchell's part, he was just trying to keep the thing from turning into a total shit show long enough to get a decent shot at the target. He takes 2 guys from his cover group, Lieutenants Besby Holmes and Raymond Hine, and reassigns them to the killer flight to take the place of McClanahan and Moore. So now you've got 4 below, 12 above. Now, when they were doing the logistical planning for this thing, the Marine Corps, they had been nice enough to send a command operations officer by the name of Major John Condon to prepare a detailed flight plan that would supposedly solve all of the problems of airspeed and fuel consumption and leave them right exactly where they wanted to be, exactly when they wanted to be there. He hands the plan to Major Mitchell, who thanks him for his help and all of his hard work, and promptly tosses the damn thing in the trash as soon as the other guy leaves the room. He goes and grabs his XO, Lieutenant Smith, and the 2 of them stay up half the night, drawing up an actual flight plan that might have a chance of working, as opposed to whatever it was that Marine Corps guy thought he was doing. They calculate that their intercept time is going to be 09:35, when they should be able to catch the Yamamoto plane right as it's dropping its flaps and starting its final landing approach. In the event, they got it wrong. They arrived on station at 9:34. Missed it by a minute. Amateurs. So, and bear in mind also, when I say 2 pilots from the killer flight had mechanical trouble and had to turn back, and Mitchell had to replace him with 2 guys from the cover flight, he had to do all that without any voice communication, because they were flying in total radio silence. And they were all maintaining an altitude below 50 feet. So yeah, you try and do all that logistical stuff with just some hand signals while simultaneously trying not to crash into the damn ocean, and let me know how it goes. But the timing worked out better than anyone might have hoped. Yamamoto's plane took off exactly on schedule, the P-38s arrived exactly when they wanted to, and it wound up being something close to a turkey shoot. Yamamoto sustains 2 fatal wounds during the first attack run, and so he's dead long before the plane ever crashes. It comes down in the middle of the jungle in a site that's so remote it takes nearly a full day for the Japanese to locate it. Yamamoto is found still strapped into his seat, sitting upright under a tree, his hand grasping the handle of his katana. And I guess if our story has a moral, it is never bring a sword to a gunfight, because you might lose. Now, in America, the death of Yamamoto had a profoundly positive effect on public morale, as you might expect. Nobody was very sad to see the architect of Pearl Harbor get what they saw as his just desserts, and the shock to the Japanese people was one from which they arguably never recovered. Yamamoto, in their eyes, was more than a military leader and more than a political leader. For many Japanese, he was something close to the embodiment of the nation itself. And there has still never been a movie of this story, which is weird. It's been an ancillary event in movies about other things, The Gallant Hour, starring Jimmy Cagney, being the most obvious one that comes to my mind, but it has never had its own dedicated film, which is strange when you consider all the obscure, deep-cut incidents and events and battles from World War II that have had movies made about them. But I have to wonder if that all goes back to some lingering sense of squeamishness over whether targeting and liquidating an enemy commander, while he's not on the battlefield, was an honorable thing to do or not. And I guess, ultimately, it'll fall to future generations to provide the answer to that question. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Have a delightful, edifying weekend with the people you love the most. I will see you next week. Until then, have a pleasant tomorrow. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.